Lately, I've been witnessing some odd behavior in my gauge cluster. So we're going to pull it out and try to fix it. The first thing to do is remove the screws at the top of the gauge cluster bezel. The lower dash trim comes out next. If you can loosen the bottom screws without looking, you can have an extra cookie. Note that you don't have to remove the lower screws all the way since the panel is slotted at the bottom. Under this bafflingly designed panel, there are two aluminum thumb screws. Once twisted free, peel back on each side of the panel and yank up. You should now see the 4 screws on the lower part of the bezel. Mine only has 3 because my E30 is a beater. Once you remember to take out all of the screws, the bezel will come free. The cluster has 2 tabs at the top with a screw going through each tab. Mine are stripped and sad, so they might just pull out like they did for me, but you can try unscrewing them anyway. These tabs are made from potato chips. You need to be careful not to bend or force them on the way out. These connectors are removed by prying on the black part with a flathead until it pops up. Once popped, they can be wiggled on out. I imagine the engineers who worked on this were very pleased with their nice connector. BMW seems to have an obsession with fussy connectors that are over-engineered, but I love them. If you have cruise control, remove the green connector by prying on the side clips with the flathead. My cluster was able to come out like this, but if you're blessed with the safety of a first-generation airbag, it's probably easier to get it out by removing the steering wheel first. After a beer top off, start with removing all the screws from the back panel of the gauge cluster. These next 2 nuts hold the fuel and temp gauges to the circuit board and are the cause of much sadness to many E30 owners. While I gratuitously remove all these screws, I want you to know that there are 2 manufacturers for this part, Motometer and VDO. If you are replacing the odometer gears while you're in here, make sure to order the right kit for the right manufacturer. My cluster has been apart in the last few years, but yours might take more oomph to pop apart. Just be careful so you don't hit the gauges as it separates. So my car leaks. Future video about that, by the way. And it is exclusively parked outside in the Pacific Northwest rain. I came back to it after being gone for a month, and the cluster was fogged up, and it smelled terrible. My suspicion is corrosion or water damage is causing this. The first thing I want to check out is referred to as the SI board, or the service indicator board. The coding plug tells the cluster how many cylinders you have, among other things, and we need to remove it in order to pull the SI board. Give it a little wiggle, and out it should come. I didn't see any water traces on this board, so we'll come back to it later. Now we're going to use the front of the cluster to safely hold the gauges while we remove them from the back plate. Our first signs that water has been here, leaving its minerals behind for us to find. When pulling the circuit board away, try to get the center gauges to stay in place as you yank on it. Tachometer and fuel economy gauge look pretty good, no moisture there. I do see deposits on the speedometer though, so we're going to clean that off with a nice hoppy IPA. Back to this guy. There are 2 lithium batteries on here that are used to hold memory when the battery's unplugged. Early cars had nickel cadmiums, and later cars were upgraded to lithium batteries. Dead batteries can be the cause of many issues. Another theory I had is that moisture that got in here caused a fault or a short that can only be recovered on this board by power cycling it. One of my green oil life LEDs is intermittent, so we're going to touch up those joints. Put the jumper back on to power up the SI board. And slide it back into its home. Making sure it goes into the slots on each side. Now it's time to deal with more corrosion, this time on the ground screws for the temperature and fuel gauges. My shaky dumb hands knocked the needle off this gauge. But we can just pop it back on, no biggie. Nice. Here's where that ground contact is made on the circuit board. It also needs a cleaning. This side was a little bit harder. It was stuck on there, and it turns out there was some plastic dry bits that were 30 years old holding it on, so we'll have to chip those away, and it comes right on out. And it comes right on out. Time to slide everything back together and make sure all the pins line up on the outer gauges and on the inner gauges. That plastic that fell apart did serve a role, and that was to keep pressure on the ground connection between that gauge and the circuit board behind it. So we need to replace it with something, which is this little piece of plastic I found. Please enjoy the following screw montage. Because the theme today has been corrosion and bad electrical contacts, we're going to twist each one of these bulbs to freshen up the contacts a little bit and scrape away any corrosion that might be in there. And now it's time for some plastic polish to impress the passengers of my car. It's much easier to put it back in. Go ahead and squeak that thing back in there and plug everything back in that was removed on the way out. practical and superstitious reasons, we're going to test it all before putting the trim back on. Another success. But why? Was it the corrosion on the Speedo? The SI battery reset? Reseating all the contacts? Who knows? Anyway, thanks for watching, and have a great project.